Hi there, and good evening, and welcome to the Jim Bohannon Show from Westwood One Radio. We're at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. Online, you'll find us at JimBohannonShow.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at Jimbo Talks. This portion of the program tonight, we want to talk about something which they say is going to be a part of our future. I know there are those out there skeptical, but certainly there are many forces, economic and political, that seem to be pushing us in the direction of the self-driving car. Yet, there is a stalled bill in that regard in the U.S. Congress right now, and we have with us tonight a Dallas-based personal injury attorney at the firm Crain Brogdon, Quentin Brogdon, to join us tonight. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Jim Bohannon. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, sir.
Interesting topic, needless to say.
Indeed it is. Let's start with just what this bill would be designed to do.
Well, the bill is designed as the predecessor bill was to, grease the wheels, if you will, to autonomous vehicles. And some would say it is creating too many protections for this infant industry. So that's an ongoing battle. How much do we need to coddle the industry? How many protections do we need to give them? But Congress is making now another attempt to put a bill in place that would, systematize and streamline between the states the regulations that the autonomous vehicles manufacturers and developers face.
Now, this is a new technology, and I gather the view is that in order to succeed, it needs to be jump-started. Now, the House, on a voice vote, unanimously passed legislation in September of 2017 to speed the adoption of self-driving cars. That's stalled last year in the U.S. Senate. And despite a series of concessions by automakers, the bill could not overcome objections of some Democrats who said it did not do enough to resolve safety concerns. Now, you're a personal injury attorney, and there are obvious questions that arise about safety concerns here. Number one that has occurred to me, in order for a car to be able to effectively drive itself, it must be in touch with its environment. That would include the road, and not all roads in this country are the same. Can driverless cars under the current technology, can they deal, for example, with roads in disrepair or even dirt roads? Those do still exist out there. Just how perfect does a road have to be before a car can effectively drive itself?
Well, we know these AVs, autonomous vehicles, crash because there's been a whole series of spectacular crashes reported in the news. Proponents of the vehicles and manufacturers of them say that, well, these crashes are hyped because this is new technology. They're getting more attention than they otherwise would. But we know that they crash because they do not always see well and they don't always think well. They don't see well in the sense that they use GPS and LiDAR and ultrasound and a number of other sensors all, put into a computerized central database to steer the AV. And for instance, if a road has been resurfaced and it has not yet been repainted, that can confuse the LiDAR. LiDAR is a series of light pulses, about 1.5 million pulses per second, that paint a three-dimensional picture of what the AV is facing as it goes down the road. But you must have line of sight. So if there's rain, sleet, or snow, or if you don't have the painted lines in the middle of the road because it's just been resurfaced, then that can confuse the LiDAR. Some people believe that GPS alone can steer these vehicles, but GPS is only accurate to within 1 to 2 feet. 1 nanosecond of error in a GPS is equal to 1 foot of error in the navigation system, 2 nanoseconds, 2 feet. So if I'm traveling down the road in one of these and there's 1 nanosecond of error, that's 1 foot of error in where my vehicle is, and I could get crunched by an 18-wheeler when otherwise I might not be crunched by that 18-wheeler. So they do not maneuver, and they should not maneuver by GPS alone. As far as thinking errors, they are programmed to make certain assumptions about the actions of other drivers and their environment. Early early AV systems were programmed to assume essentially that all of the other drivers on the road would follow the traffic laws. What could be wrong with that assumption? Plenty, it turns out, and there were some crashes that occurred because of that, and the system is being tweaked. They also do not react, these systems, well to stationary objects that suddenly become moving objects. If we, as a human, are driving down a road and we see a child standing on the side of the road with the ball, as we're driving through a neighborhood, we are attuned to the possibility that that child suddenly may run out into the roadway chasing that ball if we're paying attention, and we're treating that scenario differently than perhaps a computer might. And so those are the kinds of things that have occurred. Also, these computers may tune out overhead structures such as overpasses and other things so that the AV system will not suddenly slam on the brakes as you're going down the freeway under an overpass. But 2 people, at least, have been decapitated when the AV car went under a trailer that was turning across the path of the AV, and the AV perhaps tuned out, in essence, that trailer and assumed it was a bridge or an overpass.
Yeah. Now, then there are other things, too, that we should probably keep in mind as well, such as, for example, the possibility of vehicles being hacked, since these will be computer-controlled. Hacking obviously remains a distinct possibility, and that brings us down to the issue of whether or not some terrorist could take over control of an 18-wheeler hauling several hundreds of thousands of gallons of gasoline and drive it into a shopping center. Have we anything that remotely resembles reasonable safety and security that could not happen? That's a rhetorical question, because I'm sure you can't.
That's a great question, Jim. And, for instance, the Pentagon's weapon systems were recently hacked within the last year, and a hacker put on the screen of the controllers of the Pentagon a thing that said, insert 2 quarters to continue operating. Think about that. That's the Pentagon's weapons systems, one of them, and it's been hacked. If that can occur to one of our quote-unquote secure weapon systems, then we know to a certainty that can occur with these AV systems. So, yes, absolutely, they are hackable. GM, for instance, has hired pro hackers to find bugs in their car computers proactively to try to weed out those vulnerabilities. But we keep being assured by corporations, Capital One and others recently, our systems are secure, they can't be hacked. We've seen again and again and again they can be hacked.
Don't hand me that argument that they can't be hacked. I mean, that's a crock, obviously, and your example of the Pentagon weapons system says that conclusively. Now, there's something else here. There is a tendency in this modern society, particularly among the young, and yes, I do say that somewhat derisively, that if you can do something, well, golly, you must do it. To which I reply, nonsense. I don't remember the meeting where we all got together and said, we really have to have driverless cars. Really? What exactly is the imperative here, other than the fact that a few people would like to drive them? And yes, I'm told that if we ever actually get them to work, that it might vastly reduce the number of accidents that occur on the road. Well, that's nice someday in Never Never Land. But here and now, what exactly is the big hurry?
The imperative, there are a number of imperatives. The idealistic and pure imperative is that more than 90% of car crashes are caused by human error. So if, in theory, you reduce human error, then you will save lives and help people. Also, if you're blind or impaired, you can jump into an autonomous vehicle, an AV, and it will take you to your destination, and you don't have to be able to see or to drive. That's the
Those are the
theory
only
in
two
favor of
arguments
them.
I've ever heard. Yeah, and granted, obviously, right now with some of the things that we're talking about, the argument of reducing our traffic accident rate by 90% remains somewhat pie in the sky. In terms of the people who are visually impaired or otherwise unable to drive, well, that's a nice argument. But in the face of the cost in terms of money, in terms of time, in terms of potential threat, again, I go back to the original question. I mean, those are interesting points, but I hardly consider the two of them combined to be this overwhelming need for us to make this change when, by all the evidence I've seen, we're just not there yet. Maybe this will be something that'll work in 20 or 30 or 50 years. But again, I see this type of hurrying about with all kinds of other things that we definitely do need here and now. And I look at this and I say, why? And I recognize what you just said about the visually impaired and about the ultimately, potentially, possibly, someday, maybe, way cutting back the death rate of automobiles. But that's not here and now.
You're right, Jim, and there's no question there's an ethical consideration that some people are going to die right now as these systems are, beta tested, and that's really what's going on. A beta test is a test of a system that's still in development, and people are familiar with that concept in connection with phones and computers and technological devices where you beta test them, and if they fail, you lose your data. But if you're beta testing, as some would argue, has been occurring with these AVs, autonomous vehicles on the roadway, and one of them fails, people die. And we're getting ready to exponentially ramp this up with more and more trucks, 18-wheelers, and some in convoys, actually. And then the carnage potentially really ramps up. And so are we ready now? The proponents say, well, we've got to test these some way, and we've got to get them on the roads and see what works and what doesn't work. But the question is, I don't want to be in a very small vehicle next to one of these 18-wheelers that's an autonomous vehicle that potentially has a bug in the software or is hacked or misses something or makes an error. And I don't want to take one for the team, if you will, so that one day we get to that panacea of, pure systems that are error-free and no crashes happen. I don't think we'll ever get there, but we'll get closer to there. But in the meantime, some people are going to die. And then from a legal point of view, who do we hold accountable and how do we hold them accountable? Some say scrap the existing legal system and give them all kinds of additional protections. And I and others say the existing legal framework can work, and we need to hold companies and others accountable when there are errors that cost human lives in the testing and the rollout of these systems.
Stay with us, more to come, including some calls for our guest. He, again, is personal injury attorney Quentin Brogdon, based in Dallas. His website is the name of his firm, Crain Brogdon. That's CrainLewisBrogdon.com. 1-866-50-JIMBO. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626 with Dallas-based personal injury attorney Quentin Brogdon. We're looking at the whole notion of driverless cars, which, and I will concede, the potential down the road, someday when it all works fine, benefits, they're real. But in the meantime, I have to wonder if we're not falling into this millennial and younger nonsense of, well, we can do it, well, we must do it. Which doesn't necessarily mean that's the case at all. Just because something is new doesn't automatically mean that it's better. And just because something is old doesn't automatically mean that it's worse. And unfortunately, they don't teach things like that in school anymore. This is Sharon in Crane, Missouri. Sharon, good evening.
Good evening, Jim, and good evening to your guest.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that this isn't just a possibility for a terrorist threat, but the criminal underworld is really always looking for a new way to get over on people. Well, if you can hack into these systems, what is to prevent someone from hacking into the system, kidnapping someone, a political figure, a banker, some really rich person with lots of money? What's to keep them from hacking into this vehicle, taking it over, kidnapping the individual, holding them for ransom, or killing them, or whatever? I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities here that they're not protecting people from.
Well, I think the short answer to what Sharon brought up, Quentin, is nothing. Actually, again, as long as this is a hackable circumstance, that's always possible, isn't it?
That's right. We've seen spectacular instances of that where Tesla's autopilot system was mistakenly caused to think there was a traffic lane where there wasn't one present by putting 3 tiny squares in a traffic lane to mimic merged striping to cause the car to veer into oncoming traffic in the left lane. I mean, that's how simple it is potentially to cause one of these vehicles to do something it should not do. Not to mention, of course, the normal hacking that we're aware of through the internet and elsewhere. So yes, absolutely, that is a potential. And we keep being assured by corporations who have a profit motive to assure us of these things that, oh, our systems are secure. Oh, just rely on us. Get on the internet, do this, use these computers, and you'll be safe and secure. And again and again and again, those promises are proving to be hollow.
Well, I mean, who would even buy that anymore? I mean, we are aware of too many things, and the Pentagon Weapons System website just being the latest and one of the better examples out there. We all know that this can happen. And I don't care how much money is spent by some mega corporation on some slick PR campaign. We all know that it's not there yet. And so if, in fact, someday we actually reach this kind of wonderful make-believe existence, well, that's wonderful. But I don't think anybody's buying it today. I mean, how easy do you have to be to buy into that?
Well, there's the so-called Internet of Things, where even your refrigerator or your thermostat or your security camera or your car that isn't even necessarily an autonomous vehicle has all of these systems now that perhaps in some instances connect to the Internet and are hackable. And so even if you don't have an autonomous vehicle, if you buy the newest version of a certain model of vehicle, you may be unwittingly getting into the stream of the Internet and into the stream of hackability, if you will, where you, unless you're a Luddite and you drive a 1956 Chevy, you potentially are subject to being a victim of this kind of hack.
Yeah, I mean, people need to realize, of course, that even though your car currently is not a driverless automobile, the fact is, how many computers are in the average, let's say, 2019 model? What, a couple of dozen maybe? I mean, I'm not sure. A lot.
Oh, yes. Our existing automobiles, even those that are not so-called AVs, autonomous vehicles, are loaded with computers. They probably, the current most modern version of the vehicle, have as many computer power gigabytes as, the early space shuttles almost. I mean, it's ridiculous the amount of computerized power that is in just a basic vehicle today. And the data that's collected when the vehicle's in a crash in the so-called black box that you download, braking, speeds, all these things are being collected on an ongoing basis.
We're coming up on a break that doesn't move, and so we will pause and come back with more in a moment. Bohannon Show, 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626, with personal injury attorney Quentin Brogdon, based in Dallas. And here is Wyndham in Wolverine, Michigan. And good evening, Wyndham. Welcome.
Hello. What I haven't heard too much about, except for 15 minutes ago, someone finally mentioned a semi, Well, I haul around little trailer, like a 14-foot trailer for work around, and through some really strange circumstances, sometimes down two tracks where a vehicle should not be, and I back into places, sometimes I'm driving 20 feet and then backing in. It's just really strange. It seems like it takes a human mind to do this stuff and to avoid a sharp stick, for example, or a rock. I can't see these autonomous vehicles being able to do what I can do, and plus all the people that haul around their boats and four-wheelers and toys on a little trailer and like to back it into places, that don't seem like a job for a robot to me.
Yeah, there are boat docks near where I am. There are no markings on the dock, any lines on that. You just have to do it by eyesight. And again, I'm with Wyndham in this particular regard, Quentin. It sounds like a wonderful idea, maybe for a science fiction movie, but I'm just not sure that we're there yet, and I fail to see what the big urgent push is. Let me be a little more honest with you. I see what the big urgent push is. I'm just not sure. Is there that much money out there at stake? Because obviously those big companies are not pushing this that hard because of how safe they are or how convenient they are for the visually impaired. There's money here somewhere, and I'm just missing it. I'm not personally in the market for one of these, and I'm just trying to figure out, Quentin, where the money is.
Well, thank you, Jim and Wyndham. Yes, you're absolutely right. Dollars are the issue here. There's a shortage of truck drivers, a major shortage of truck drivers. And so the idea is that at least, Uber for a while, and they've discontinued this, but in the state of Arizona, they had human drivers coming up to the edge of the state and then loading the cargo into autonomous vehicles, and there was a backup driver. It would go all across the state of Arizona, and then it would be loaded back at the edge of the state into a vehicle that would be driven by a human driver with autonomy. And so, yes, truck driving on freeways, many believe, is going to be one of the initial rollouts of this, and it's all about dollars, and it's all about saving money on the cost of truck drivers, and it's all about a shortage of human truck drivers.
Yeah, but I mean, you can retrain other people to do. I mean, if in fact, I know that we have pretty low unemployment right now, so that means that, quite frankly, if market economics are working at all, that therefore we're going to have to start paying them more. I know truck drivers can do pretty well, but if there's a shortage, then supply and demand kicks in, and we're going to have to pay them more. And yes, that'll add incrementally to the cost of whatever is hauled by trucks, which is everything. But that's the way the market economy works. If they're in demand, that's fine. I mean, again, I'm sure that may be part of the reason, and I know that businesses always love to eliminate labor overhead, as they refer to paying working Americans. But I wonder how much they love paying out lawsuits from people like you after somebody gets killed.
Well, I deal all day, every day with 18-wheelers hitting and killing people, and trucking companies that put profits over safety, and truck drivers that are on the road too long or falsify logs or whatever may occur. And there are many, many truck drivers who are doing it the right way out there. And I'm not implying that's not the case. But what I am saying is that supply and demand are not keeping up, and trucking companies are facing major shortages. And some would say, well, simply raise the pay. And I don't know all of the economics of it, but that would be one of the answers. If you raise the pay, more people will come into it. But the problem now is there aren't enough people going into trucking to fill all of the slots. And so the trucking business is saying, well, autonomous vehicles, let's have robots do it.
But I mean, that's nice to say. But again, if the pay goes up and they put out ads, hey, drive a truck, make $120,000 or whatever the figure may be. If that doesn't work, then our whole concept of market economics doesn't work. And again, if you start saying, okay, yeah, we saved a ton of money on all the drivers that we let go. We did, of course, pay out 3 times as much in damages and lawsuits because our trucks were running into people. vehicle. I mean, that's just weird economics to me. You're the injury lawyer. You tell me.
Well, right now what's occurring, let's just set aside autonomous vehicles, is profit motive and fierce competition within the industry and truck drivers who are aging out. Many of the traditional drivers are getting older, and the younger folks are not coming into the industry to the same degree that the existing older generation did. So there's a shortage, and there are fierce competitive forces at work. And so safety gets put in the back seat.
That's why we have regulations. We've known for a long time that for some reason, and I've never fully understood this, I've never been a CEO, but I've never understood, if I can save $20 over here by cutting labor overhead and incur $50 worth of expenses in damages, not to mention the reliability and credibility of my company, that sounds to me like bad economics. Again, I understand what you're saying. I just don't understand it. My response, I would think, as an intelligent CEO would be, well, someday this is probably going to work. But right now, I don't want that many lawsuits.
Well, you're playing the role of an intelligent, diligent, and conscientious CEO. Unfortunately, based on what I've seen, that's not always what we see on the other side of the case when we're suing these trucking companies. We see trucking companies that have taken shortcuts and truck drivers who want to do the right thing but are being forced into situations where they're not being given the resources, they're being pushed, and they're running out of money and time to do the right thing. They want to do the right thing. Most truck drivers want to do the safe thing on the roadways, but they're being pushed into situations and circumstances by these trucking companies based on this fierce profit motive that many times at least forces them into situations that cause death and injury.
Fair enough. More to come. More calls, 1-866-50-JIMBO. We're looking at the push for the driverless vehicle, and we'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO. And there's a holdup in Congress on a bill to expedite the driverless vehicle. And we've gone over the various problems that exist and the fact that someday, maybe down the road in some future universe, this may be a wonderful idea. But right here and now, it just strikes me as this is misplaced priorities. But anyway, Mike in Gold Bar, Washington. Good evening, Mike.
Taking the call. I drove dump truck, paving, gravel, all that stuff, and now I can't see it well enough to do either of those things. So I not only wouldn't get in an autonomous vehicle, but I don't think it would have actually performed as well as I did in most cases. What I wonder is, why don't these people that are gung-ho about these things get like right-of-ways parallel to the 10 freeway and put those autonomous vehicles, like railroads, they have their own tracks. Cars have their own freeways. Why not just have an autonomous vehicle service route and test those things? Because it's going to take 25, 30 years to really get it down. And if they crash out in the desert and they don't hurt. I don't want them on the freeway with me and my family.
I mean, the thing of it is, we're talking about not just testing them, we're talking about using them. And I trust you are aware, Mike, of how many trillions of dollars it would cost to build a parallel road system just for trucks.
Well, that's exactly right. And then we'll see how far they get. And I mean, that's what I did. I just don't think they belong on the freeway with people.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously, we'll talk to our guests, but clearly you could not afford to knock down the millions of homes and businesses and pay for the whole country's activities would be ground to a halt while we did nothing but build parallel roads. I mean, that just wouldn't work. But Quentin?
I think in theory, that's a great idea, and it's an excellent suggestion. But yes, Jim, I agree with you. The logistics of getting that done are just prohibitive because it would be like setting up a whole parallel, interstate system. like it or not, they're being tested and run on the interstates beside our vehicles as we drive down those interstates.
Hey, this is not a hypothetical circumstance anymore. I mean, if you go out on an interstate today, the odds may be slim, but you may well encounter a driverless vehicle, correct?
Absolutely. If you go to California or Arizona or Florida, your odds are exponentially higher than they would be in other states. Those are the states that have pioneered it, and Texas, my home state, is right behind them. So, yes, they are on the roadways. Sometimes we recognize them, sometimes we don't. In California, I was in San Francisco, and people actually prank them. They walk out in front of them at an intersection when they see an autonomous vehicle to see whether it will stop, and then they walk back to the edge of the sidewalk, and they walk out again, and they actually play with them. And which
what do you mean play with them?
To try and see whether they're stopped, to make them stop and start and stop and start, and sort of play games with the autonomous vehicles at an intersection, which I think is a foolhardy exercise, needless to say, particularly given the prone to error as they are.
Yeah, one would certainly think so. Stephen in Billings, Montana joins us. Hello, Stephen.
Hello. I'm an oil truck driver in Montana, and I think these automated trucks are going to have some difficulty in a job like mine, because I go driving on a lot of dirt roads in all kinds of weather conditions, rainy, snowy. I got to get out and chain up, drive in the mud and everything. And when I arrive at my destination, I have to get out of the truck, and I get out and test the oil for the quality of the oil. And then I got to hook up my hoses and operate my pump to load my truck, and then later to unload my truck when I make deliveries. When I deliver it from the well site to where it gets injected into the pipeline. And most of the places that I deliver or get oil from are little mom and pop oil wells. They're not multi-million-dollar oil wells. Now, are these automated trucks going to be able to do all of that when you're driving with 10,000 gallons of hazmat on a questionable road in bad weather conditions?
I believe the short answer to that currently, Quentin, would be not now and probably not in the foreseeable future, correct?
That's right. Even the most, optimistic proponents of these say they will be engaged in long-haul straight runs, and that human drivers, particularly in the trucking segment, will take over to do the kinds of tasks that you're talking about here that involve, loading, chaining, checking oil, pulling into terminals, those kinds of things. The autonomous vehicle trucks are just not ready to do. And some would argue, and I would be one, that they're not necessarily to ride down the freeway either, but even the most optimistic proponents can see they're not ready to do the things you were talking about.
Then obviously this is not the kind of thing that you can phase it in, and we'll bring it about now. They'll be okay on the interstates and over there at my mom and pop's store. Well, hey, we're going to run over a few people. That's not going to work. This is not the kind of thing where you phase in. Either it's ready everywhere or else it's not. Trucks do not stay on interstates or decent roads. Many trucks wind up servicing some of the more out of the way and primitive roads in the country. So again, I'm missing why we are looking at this as anything other than an idea we should look at in 10, 15, or 50 years.
Jim, you are preaching to the converted on this, and I am of your same mind on this issue. The argument against what you said is, well, we have to begin testing. We've
already begun testing. We're testing. We've been testing for 15 or 20 years, haven't we?
And these systems, the argument is, have to begin accumulating errors. And unfortunately, many of those errors involve the loss of human life.
Yeah.
You and I are on that side of
collateral damage, I guess they call it.
Yes, collateral damage. That's correct. And they're being beta tested on the roads, I would argue, and others have agreed. If you beta test your phone and it crashes, it loses data. if you beta test an autonomous vehicle or truck, people die.
Exactly. There is a distinction there, and I would have to assume that at some level, some place, some people must be thinking about this. I hope. We'll come back and take some more calls in just a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO. And we're talking with the personal injury attorney Quentin Brogdon of the Dallas firm Crain Brogdon. We're looking at efforts in Congress to jumpstart the stalled self-driving car bill and that some of the problems inherent herein. Namely, it would seem to me, and I gather to our guest as well, that this may have some distinct advantages down the road, maybe, but there are a lot of problems here and now, and the urgency escapes me, given all the other problems we have. This is Jeannie, actually, in Central Connecticut. Hello, Jeannie.
Yes, good evening. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I started listening about 2 callers ago, so I have missed part of the conversation, but I thought I'd offer some information, and also I had a question, which I think you just answered, why in the world they're doing this. But my husband has been a truck driver for 40 years, and my son owns a truck company, and so I was interested in the conversation because my family talks about all kinds of issues, and we have so many things that we wish Congress would do to help the trucking industry, and this is crazy. This is not one of them.
Comments, Mr. Brogdon?
Yes, thank you. The trucking industry, no doubt, is in crisis right now. It is buffeted by economic and other pressures, and trucking companies are being forced to make horrible decisions, sometimes between safety and just staying afloat.
Well, that's why we have regulations. That's why we fine people. We're all aware of the propensity for private enterprise, and I love private enterprise, but it's propensity to cut corners when the board of directors is breathing down your neck about that quarterly dividend.
That's right, and the theory is that the cops, if you will, the federal government and the state entities that are enforcing these regulations are enforcing them, and they're catching, the truck drivers and others who are being put in these positions where they're being forced to drive very long hours for low pay and sometimes to exceed those hours beyond what the regulations say. But the truth is, what happens is these truck drivers, many of them are being forced to make a choice between how to feed their families and whether to follow these regulations. And this autonomous vehicle push is not helping that at all. And in fact, it's driven, some would say, by the need and the financial imperative of these trucking companies to replace these truck drivers with robots, essentially.
Let's see if we can get a call here from Terry in Mount Vernon, Illinois. Hello, Terry, and good afternoon, evening. Welcome.
Good evening, Jim.
Hi.
I have basically a 2-pronged question, and I won't ask how you are because we always know.
Right.
My question is, with these autonomous vehicles, along the interstate, or not very far from the interstate, we have a lot of power, base power spreading areas. And when these things go up, they put out the EMP when these things blow their stacks. What would happen to those vehicles when they come into contact with this EMP?
Okay, all right. We've got about 20 seconds. Go ahead, Quentin.
I don't know the specific answer to that question. I just know that we're still working out all the bugs. There are all kinds of influences that can affect how these vehicles communicate with the internet, how they communicate with GPS, and how they navigate on the roadways.
We're going to have to wrap on that note. Stay on the line. We'll speak off air. Quentin Brogdon, Dallas-based personal injury attorney with the firm Crain Brogdon.com. This is Westwood One.